Yes, sir. We can start. So I've admitted everyone. The rest will join gradually. So we can start. Sir, you can start, sir.
You're asking me?
No, sir.
I'll do that, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's very early, and the institute is our SIRC institute, and as SIRC is committed to the programs what they have already announced, and all the programs seems to be on a different note, different subjects, and especially a specialized one. And I, on behalf of the chairman, Sri Jalpati of SIRC, and secretary, Sri Panaraj sir, I welcome our speaker and the participants of the day. This is Sundara Rajan. And the program is coined so well that everybody will be happy to do this, especially the people who are all interested in the subject. That should be the special mention on this. And today's speaker being Sri Bhaskar Paneer Selvam, and a fellow member of the institute. He has passed our CA, ICIS, ICWA. Is a qualified person in all the three. We used to call them as 3-in-1 earlier days. Bachelor of Commerce, and is a partner in PwC, and he has got over 20 years of professional experience. He has also worked in the overseas firms, US and UK. He has handled Ind AS and US GAAP audits, and has rich experience in handling large IFRS engagements. He's a speaker of our institute, and is a member of Ind AS implementation committee. Thank you, sir. Thank you for accepting to be a speaker of the day. I welcome you to this program, and the floor is yours, sir. You can continue, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks all the participants.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sundarajan. Good morning to you all. Thanks to the institute for getting me on board to present on this particular topic. It's on Saturday morning, 7:30. I'm extremely happy that we are seeing so much of interested professionals on to learn about some of these accounting matters. I was just asking my CA colleague member saying that at 7:30 in the morning will we get enough participants, but I saw the kind of roll call. It's fantastic to see our members so energetic on a Saturday morning. So good morning to you all. Nice to see that. Nice to see this on a Saturday morning. So I'll get into the topics. There are two topics we are going to discuss today. One is on Ind AS 116 on leases. And also we are going to talk about Ind AS 16 on property, plant and equipment. So I'll share the screen, then we will take you through this topic. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
1 minute. Sorry, my screen is not moving. 1 minute. Okay. Okay. Fine. I just tested it. Yeah. Okay. So as you know that this particular standard was effective 1st of April 2019, but it went through a lot of deliberation internationally as well, and we also got it into India with effect from 1st of April 2019. It had significant changes in number of companies' balance sheet and profit and loss account. If you could see the level of interest in this particular thing, the US Security Exchange of Commission, which is like our Indian SEBI, said in 2005, saying that close to 1.25 trillion of operating lease obligations has never been recorded in the balance sheet. So that's a level and size at which was not recorded in the balance sheet of any companies. Even the ISB chairman who said that he wanted to see an aircraft in a balance sheet, where he's flying, because people were not putting any of those assets on the obligations on the balance sheet. And globally, these situations have been increasing. People were trying to use resources from outside or assets from outside, but not that there in the balance sheet. So somebody was not able to analyze the profitability of the companies appropriate. So therefore, this standard was brought in and was effective 1st of April 2019. Now, sorry, I'm just putting. Sorry. So in terms of, if you look at the industries which largely got affected, this slide shows in terms of how each of the industries has been affected. Retail is the significant one which has got affected, which means the debt increase in the balance sheet, the borrowings increase in the balance sheet by 98%. And airlines is the next one, which their debt increased by 47%. And professional services, lot of professional companies also kind of take properties on lease, but they never put it on the balance sheet. That their debt increased by 42%. Healthcare increased by 36%. And even also in terms of the EBITDA, a lot of companies EBITDA improved. We'll talk about in little later in terms of how the EBITDA improves because of applying this particular accounting. The fundamental principle, if you see the graph right, in our original Ind AS 17 lease accounting, the red color which depicts here, you will have a constant charge which comes into the profit and loss account. You would have entered into a contract for a lease, and that contract cost gets into the profit and loss account on a timely, in the sense monthly basis. There's a standard cost which gets into the profit and loss account. However, in an Ind AS 116 on lease accounting, you have two costs which gets into the profit and loss account. One, there is a new asset which gets into your balance sheet, which is called as right of use asset, which gets amortized over a period of time over the lease term. Then you have a lease liability, which typically you record on the day one, and the interest cost on that lease liability gets into the profit and loss account. So in the initial years, you will have a larger interest cost because you will have a large lease liability. As and when you make the payment, this lease liability reduces, therefore the interest cost reduces. So from an accounting charge perspective, you will have more charge in the initial years in the application of Ind AS 116, and the later years it would kind of taper down and decrease. But overall, over the period of the lease, the total cost as per the new standard as well as the old standard will remain the same. But there is a periodic change which will be happening, which has a ramifications in terms of EBITDA, the level of debt which you are showing in the balance sheet, etc. Now, this is an important element in terms of the definition of a lease, because in any contract cannot be considered to be a lease. There are certain tests which needs to be met before a particular contract is considered as a lease. First, there needs to be an identified asset. For example, there is a truck. They need to have a specific truck which is there in the contract. If there is a computer, there is a serial number of the computer which needs to be there. So it cannot be a generic asset which is included, and therefore there needs to be an identified asset. If there is no identified asset, that contract is not a lease, but it gets into a normal type of any other contract, and you record that charge relating to that lease payments, not a lease payments, contract payments into the profit and loss account. You don't enter into a lease accounting at all. The next step is who has the right to get all the economic benefits from the use of the assets. If the lessee, here the customer means lessee, the lessee has the right to obtain substantially all the economic benefits, then you go to the next step. If the customer does not have, or the lessee does not have substantially all the economic benefit, then it is not a lease accounting. You go out of the lease accounting. Then who, certain times it will be included in terms of who has the right to direct and how the asset can be used, which means typically who has control over the asset in terms of the usage. If the lessee or the customer has the control, then it becomes a lease contract. If it is not so, then it is not a lease. And sometimes the asset will be specifically designed for the lessee. In those situations, it becomes a lease. So therefore, this test is important in terms of how do you go through the lease accounting. So you need to have an identified asset. The lessee should have substantially all the economic benefits of the asset. He should be having a right to control that asset. If not, it is not a lease. Then you do you don't do a lease accounting. Otherwise, if all these conditions are met, then it becomes a lease asset. The other important point is if the lessor has a right to substitute the asset. For example, you will have certain contracts. You will say that I'll provide 50 trucks, right? And if 50 trucks in that contract of 50 trucks, if the lessor has the right to substitute any particular trucks, and he can do a 5-year fleet or a 10-year old fleet, etc., then the lessee doesn't have a control. Typically, the lessor has the substitution right, which is significant and substantial. Therefore, in that situation, that contract doesn't take the shape of a lease accounting. It goes through a normal contract process. So this is important in terms of who has the substantive right in terms of substituting the asset. So there are certain practical exemptions which has been provided by the standard. It also perceives that there could be issues in terms of the, adopting the standard. So therefore, any short-term leases is exempted from lease accounting. You can do a normal accounting and you can charge to the profit and loss account. Typically, leases with less than 12 months can be considered as a short-term leases. But one of the conditions is that it should not have a purchase option. If the, even if the short-term lease has the purchase option, then it cannot be exempted out of the lease accounting. So typically, short-term leases, for example, you would have a building on a rent for 12 months period or less than 12 months period. That is not considered to be a lease. You can get an exemption. Still, you can do it, but it allows for you to take an exemption from a lease accounting perspective. Here, the lease term is important. Sometimes people do have 11 or 12 months lease, but they extend subsequently. So for the purpose of this lease term definition, you have to see whether there is a reasonable certainty that they will extend that lease. If there is a reasonable certainty that they will extend that lease, then you have to include the extension period, then compare whether there is a short-term lease or not. So that is important. Just because somebody enters into 11 months lease and there's an automatic renewal which happens after every 12 months, it doesn't mean that it is a short-term lease. You have to evaluate including the extension term as well. The other exemption is low value leases. Typically, you will have computers or other Xerox machines, etc., which typically are low value assets. There is no prescribed threshold in terms of what is the monetary limit. There was a guidance in the global which was saying that close to $5,000 seems to be the low value assets. But people can take a materiality threshold in terms of how do they define that low value leases, and that is exempted from the lease accounting. If these are out of lease accounting, you can take the payments under this arrangement as a cost towards the P&L on a straight line basis over the period. So that is in terms of the exemptions from lease accounting. So now in terms of how the lessee accounts for it. So one distinction here is that just one information here is that there is no change in the way the lessor accounts for its entire lease standard. That remains the same either under the old Ind AS 17 or under Ind AS 116. The lessor accounting remains to be the same. Only in the lessee's books, the accounting changes. Earlier in the lessee books, we used to record only the finance lease as an asset in the books, but not the operating lease. Under the new standard, both the finance lease as well as the operating lease are included in the balance sheet of the company. Now, as far as there is a right of use asset which is recognized, there is a lease liability which is recognized in the balance sheet. What is right of use asset? It comprises of lease liability, any payment which is made before the commencement date to the lessor. Sometimes you have to restore the particular place which you have taken on lease. For example, you have to dismantle certain items and give the property in the same way which you have taken. So those costs which are going to incur in the future, you have to present value those costs and include in the right of use asset. And any initial direct costs, for example, you may incur cost towards brokerage, commission, registration of the leases. All those can be included as part of the right of use asset. And so the way you account for is you present value all the future cash flows using a discount rate. Discount rate is typically the borrowing rate of the company. If it is a 5-year lease term, you take 5-year borrowing rate. If it's a 10-year lease term, you typically find out what is a 10-year borrowing rate. You present value of those cash flows and record an asset, debit your right of use asset and credit a lease liability. That's how the entire accounting has been done. There are certain items which can be included as part of the lease payments. One, it can be a fixed payments. Sometimes it can be variable lease payments. In variable lease payments can be included only if it is related to an index. For example, the variable lease payment is based upon an let's say consumer price inflation index or a wholesale price inflation index, then it can be included as part of the lease payments. However, if the lease payment is based upon, let's say, percentage of revenue or percentage of profits, etc., then it is not considered to be a lease payment, which needs to be included for the accounting for lease. Those costs will go into the profit and loss account as and when you pay to the lessor. So that is not included as part of the lease payments. Then if the lessee is guaranteeing any residual value to the asset, that will be included as part of the lease payment. If there is an exercise price for the purchase option, that is also included, provided you are reasonably certain to exercise that purchase option. Then if there are any penalties for terminating the lease, if it is reasonably certain that you will terminate the lease, then that is included. So these are part of the lease payments, which will be present valued in and included under the lease liability, and corresponding right of use asset also will be recognized in the balance sheet. So I'm just seeing if there are any questions. Yeah, so I'll just see some questions. Can you give some example of non-identifiable assets? Non-identifiable asset, I said in terms of for the example which I set out, where we talked about, let's say, 10 trucks which are there. So it is not an identifiable asset. You have to give the truck number and the truck name, and the truck the series, whatever the registration numbers, etc. That becomes an identifiable asset. Saying that 5 trucks which can be substituted cannot be an identifiable asset. Is there any distinction between finance lease and operating lease in the context of this new Ind AS? As far as the lessee is concerned, there is no difference. Because you do account for the finance lease or operating lease in the balance sheet of the lessee as a right of use asset and a lease liability. Office taken on lease for 15 years is covered by this Ind AS. Yes, it is covered. How much ever the years. Even the land which you are taking from SIPCOT, for example, in the context of the Tamil Nadu region, it is considered to be a lease accounting. So even land is included as part of this lease accounting. Therefore, the number of years doesn't matter. Can cost paid to state or for lease or for land use, how to amortize? So that's a good point which you have asked. So we are talking about cost paid to state industrial estate for leasehold rights. See, typically you pay upfront and then you pay an 1 rupee charge on an annual basis to the SIPCOT authorities or the state industrial authorities. So the 1 rupee on a present value basis will not be material. There could be the cost which you could pay. One, it could comprise of the initial premium which you pay. Then you could have paid a security deposit to them. So these are the 2 typical costs which should be there. So what you typically do is the premium paid on day 1 is a right of use asset. Then you would have paid a security deposit. In the security deposit, you typically present value the security deposit if it is a refundable security deposit. The difference between the present value amount and the amount which you have paid as a security deposit, the difference is considered to be a prepaid rent, and that is included in the right of use asset. You amortize over the period of the lease. Typically, it is 99 years in these geography. Of course, IT won't allow depreciation, so that is a subject matter of interpretation. Some companies have taken a position saying that this is a prepaid rent, and therefore they would deduct this cost which is paid as a prepaid rent will be allowed as a charge. So while tax authorities do take position saying that these are not allowable costs because this is a land cost, but certain companies do take positions saying that this is like a prepaid rent of the land taken on operating lease. So that would be considered as a deduction. So that is a position which some teams have taken as well. how to segregate the value of lease liabilities for tax purposes between actual lease costs. Segregate the value of lease liabilities for tax purposes. So the lease liabilities for tax purposes doesn't have any context. So you will have a present value of the lease liability, which will be included as a current and non-current liability. So that whatever the payments which you are making, okay, tax. Maybe I will discuss the tax tax aspect here. As far as the tax is concerned, you will add the right of use amortization as a disallowed charges, and also the interest expense which you are debited to the profit and loss account, that will not qualify for your deduction. That will also be added because it's a notional charge which gets into the profit and loss account. Then you subtract the whatever the lease payments which you are making to the lessor. So that is allowed as a deduction from the profit and loss account. So the accounting charge is disallowed and the actual payment is recorded as a deduction here. So that's in terms of the some of the questions which members have asked. So put out some of the practical considerations. So as such, impact on the financial statements, the asset base will increase on account of ROU asset. The debt will increase because you will bring out the lease liability, which will be classified as a current and non-current lease liability. ROU asset, there is no classification change. It is one ROU asset. You don't distinguish between what is short-term and long-term. Everything is ROU asset. Debt will be included in the balance sheet as a separate line item. In the sense, sorry, the lease liability. EBITDA will increase because now this whatever the lease payment which you are making, that is not debited to the profit and loss account. Rather, it is debited as an interest charge and depreciation charge. So therefore, company's EBITDA will improve. There will be impact on MAT taxes because in the initial years you will have both. In the sense, you will have larger charge into the profit and loss account in the form of amortization of ROU asset plus the because of larger charges, the book profit would be lower. Therefore, you will have a corresponding MAT taxes as well. As far as the normal income tax is concerned, there is no impact per se. Other financial ratios will change because your debt to equity ratio will increase. The current ratio will decrease because your current liabilities will increase. Return on capital employed will decrease because you will have more asset into your book. So if you have some of the covenant agreements with your bankers, this is one area which you need to look into it when you are adopting the new standard. Some of the practical consideration which I have put here is what is the lease term people have to adopt. I explained it previously that if you could have a non-cancelable period, then there could be an extension. Then you need to include both the non-cancelable period plus the extension period if there is an intention to extend the lease term as well. Maintenance expenses, whether it should be included as part of the lease payments or I should account as a separate point. So that is a distinction which people wanted to understand. There is a policy charge which is available in the standard which says that you can include as part of the lease payments, or if you believe that you want to account that separately, you can do that as well and include only the lease payments relating to the building or the other property, and the maintenance expenses you can charge it to the profit and loss account over the period. Sale and lease back. Sometimes you have a property, you sell and take it on lease back. How the lease needs to, lessee, can they record the entire profit when they sell that particular asset? The answer is no. To the extent of the right which is retained by the lessee. For example, if you have a property building whose, let's say, useful life is 10 years, but you are selling the property and taking the lease back for 6 years, you are retaining the interest of the property to the extent of 60%. So therefore, the gain which you can record in the profit and loss account is only for 40% of the sale of the profit. The balance 60% you cannot recognize the profit because that will be adjusted against the right of use assets. So you can't. So proportionately you will include the ROU asset, and you cannot recognize the entire gain because in substance you are selling the property to yourself. Lease modification to the terms. any lease modification which happens because of increasing lease rental payments or other terms, etc. At the time of modification, a recalculation will be done, and that adjustment will be made to the right of use asset. Should lease liability be included in net debt disclosures? Some companies, because of their debt ratios, they would want not to be included, but you have to clearly disclose the fact that lease liability is included in net debt and the reason for it. And leases with substitution rights. For example, I told about Xerox machine, computers, vehicles. If there is no specific identifiable asset and the supplier, in the sense lessor has the right to substitute the asset, then it will not be considered as a lease. Direct costs, can it be included right of use asset? Yes, brokerage, commission, etc. can be included as part of the right of use assets. Variable payments, what are the type of variable payments which can be included? Certain payments which are based upon indexes like WPI or CPI, that can be included, but not any variable payments based on sales or profits, etc. That cannot be included under variable payments. Good on space, whether lease, if the space is fully earmarked for you and the space is fully determined and included in the lease agreement, yes, it can be considered as a lease. However, if they are saying that the lease space is fungible according to the wishes of the lessor, and he can substitute that good on space with any other good on space available in that particular property, then it is not a lease. So these are some of the practical considerations which you would have. Some point on extension and termination clauses. People do evaluate in terms of whether I have to include the extension terms or not. If the rent rates are going to be at the market rates or lower than that rates, and typically people will try to opt for the extension, therefore that will be included in the lease term. If you have taken significant leasehold improvements, then that will be included as part of, then the general tendency is to extend that particular lease. If there are significant penalty costs or terminal costs which are there, then you will not cancel that lease, and therefore extension is highly probable. And then if the underlying asset is very important to the asset's business, the lessee's business, then you generally tend to extend. So these are typically the consideration which you take into account before you decide whether it is, what would be the lease term, whether it is a non-cancelable period plus the extended term as well. One guidance which came out very recently is about the rent concession or the deferred payment. Because certain people are getting deferred payment for the pandemic, also for reduction in the lease payments. So there was a simple guidance which was rolled out, which indicated that if there is a reduction of lease payments, that will be recognized into the profit and loss account, which means you will credit your profit and loss account and debit your lease liability. So that's an simple accounting which you do. Otherwise, typically you do the modification of the lease. In this case, there's a guidance which was set out saying that you can just credit the profit and loss account for the decrease which you are getting. If there is a rent deferral, you will recompute the lease liability using the old discount rate. Whatever the difference between the new lease liability and the lease liability which is in the balance sheet, that will be recognized in your profit and loss account. So that's the guidance in terms of the pandemic thing. We talked about the maintenance services, repair, etc. Should it be included or not? We said it is a policy choice. You can include or not. Reimbursement of general insurance costs, whether can I account it as a separate consideration? The answer is no, because it is part of the contract, and it is necessary for the lease to be there. So therefore, it is included as part of the consideration when you account for the lease. As far as the property tax is concerned, if you are statutorily obliged to pay payable by the lessor and it is reimbursed by the lessee, if it is as a percentage of value, then it cannot be included as a lease. In other cases, it is included as part of the total consideration of the lease payments. So that's largely in terms of the lease. Maybe I'll ask there were some questions on the chat box. I'll try to answer those questions. How to segregate? Okay, I talked about this. PV calculation for lease liability if there is no loans in the books. So typically you estimate what would be the incremental borrowing rate based upon the strength of the balance sheet, and then you consider that as the incremental borrowing rate, and you compute the lease liability. If you take land for 99 with the full prepayment in first year, still we need to apply in days. The answer is yes, because you just paid upfront. That's all. It is, instead of paying subsequently, you paid upfront. With respect to the tax position considered features like finance lease and IT period, the accretion in lease liability shall be allowed. The accretion in lease like notional interest. No, so the accretion in the notional interest will not be allowed as an expenditure, which is what I discussed in terms of the actual payment will be allowed as an expenditure. With free rent by 6 months based on stating of reduction of rent, instead of reduction of, I talked about it. If it's a deferred rent, you recalculate the present value of the lease liability, and with the unchanged discount rate, the difference between the existing lease liability and the new lease liability will be credited to the profit and loss account. In case of finance, do the lessee need to account this as a ROE, or in case of finance lease? It is clear in terms of, as far as the lessee is concerned, there is no distinction whether it's a finance lease or an operating lease. Both are included as part of the right of use asset, and it is not included as the as a PPE. Amount spent on premises towards furnitures and fittings, partitions, ACs, that will be included in the respective class of assets, and you will depreciate according to their useful life. So in the deferred tax and lease accounting, so you typically find out what is the balance sheet, the tax books and the accounting books. For the lease liability, you will claim the future lease payments, and you find out the difference between the right of use asset and the lease liability. For the differential, you create a deferred tax asset or liability. If there are any further questions, maybe you can open up the.
Yes, sir. I have enabled the option to unmute themselves and ask, sir. So they can unmute anytime and they can ask the question.
Yeah.
And right now the PPT is not visible. Maybe made up minimize the screen.
Yeah, I have minimized the screen. I have taken out the PPT because that's closed. So
fine. Now audience can unmute themselves, and if they want, they can ask the questions. I given the option to unmute. I'll keep it open anytime. As and when they want, they can unmute and ask when you post for questions.
Yeah, because I have the other session which we will take, but we will close this in terms of lease. If there are any further questions, I'm happy to answer the questions to the members.
Those were the questions. I can't see any questions.
So good morning, sir. I'm Shiva. So
Yes, Shiva.
With respect to that SIPCOT that you have answered now, so the prepayment has been done in the first year of when I have taken the leasehold land. So in the subsequent years, so what treatment will I give for Ind AS 116?
Yeah, so on typically the SIPCOT leases are for 99 years, and you pay the prepayment. That prepayment is included in the right of use asset, because instead of making the payment on the subsequent period, day one you have made the payment. So that is what, if you see what is the components of the right of use asset, the prepayment which you have made at the commencement of the lease, the future lease payments, then if there are initial direct costs which are included, so all those things are included in the payments. Just that you will not have a lease liability in the balance sheet, but whatever the payments which you have included, that will be included as right of use asset. See, typically in the previous accounting, what people were taking, there are two positions they are taking. People are taking that as a prepaid amount and showing as a separate line item in the balance sheet as another non-current asset, and they've been amortizing it. Some companies have been taking a position saying it as a fixed assets and included as part of the land, and with the adequate footnote disclosure saying that this is an amount paid for asset taken on lease, or they have considered as a finance lease in the books and recorded as a land asset. So that is what people have been taking, but now there is a clarity, it is included as part of the right of use asset.
Sir, if you come closer to your laptop, your voice is getting feeble, so you can see that.
Is it better? Is it better now?
If you sit far away, it will be better.
Okay. If it's far away, it's better. Okay.
Because if you come closer, it's getting feeble. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe you can see that.
Is there any questions?
Those were the questions.
Shiva, does it answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
How to take the judgment of the low value assets? That's a materiality call which you have to take. See, typically people take all these computers and this small office equipments which are taken on lease as a low value asset. There is no specific threshold which has been set. It's a materiality call for each of the entities. If you, let's say, for example, computers, you are taken small computers, let's say 40, 50 computers, then you can consider it to be a low value asset. So long as those assets can independently operate and it is not interrelated to each other, you can consider that as an low value assets, but not like a factory building or factory machineries. You can't consider that as a low value assets. Bought annuity projects are I presume that bought, built, operate, transfer contracts. As you rightly put out, these are not covered under the leases because this is specifically dealt in Ind AS 115 revenue accounting. This typical PPA agreements, the private public partnership agreements. So there's a specific accounting which has been set out in the particular standard. Depending upon the criteria which you made, whether it's a service concession arrangement or not, based upon that, the respective accounting would be done. So that is out of lease accounting. So maybe if there are no further questions on lease, maybe I will start with the property, plant and equipment.
Yes, sir. Maybe we can start
One.
with the next topic.
Yeah. Are you able to see my presentation?
No, not yet, sir. You need to
Not yet. Okay.
stop your screen sharing. Introduction.
Oh, 1 minute. Sorry. Are you able to?
Yes, now, yeah, in day 16.
Presentation? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the next topic is on property, plant and equipment. So this is not a new standard per se, which is actually all of us know about our AS10 in the past, and largely it remains the same. But we'll also talk about some of the key aspects which are set out in this particular standard. As a standard goes, the property, plant and equipment are tangible items which are held for use for production, supply of goods or services, or for rental, or for administrative purposes. So, and it is expected to be used for more than one period. So this is a fundamental definition. So long as you are using this definition for recognition of the property, plant and equipment, it will be useful in the entire process of the recognition and accounting for that. What is excluded out of this is that if you are classifying any asset which is held for sale under Ind AS 105, for example, if you have classified a land or a property that you are going to sell it in future, within the next 12 months, it typically you move out of the property, plant and equipment, and you do a separate measurement and accounting for that. So that is excluded out of the property, plant and equipment standard. Biological assets relating to agricultural activity is excluded out of this standard. Exploration and evaluation assets are excluded out of this. Mineral rights, reserves, natural gas reserves, and other resource related matters are excluded out of the particular standard. And assets of lease in accordance with 116 and investment property within scope of Ind AS 40 is also excluded out of this particular standard. So these are some of those aspects which are excluded out of this particular standard. Now, you recognize in property, plant and equipment if that property, plant and equipment provides future economic benefits to the entity, and the item can be measured reliably into your balance sheet. Typically, it includes the purchase price, non-refundable duties, and any discounts are deducted. All direct costs associated with bringing the plant and machinery or the assets to the present location and condition, that is included. And also, which is important, is decommissioning costs. For example, we talked about this in lease accounting. It's applicable here as well. If you have to incur any future costs for dismantling a particular place, or because of you have done damage to the particular place, and you have to you have to spend amount to bring to the same shape and same shape at which the asset was given to you, then you estimate that cost and include as part of the cost of the property, plant and equipment. Of course, you include the borrowing cost into this as well. So the reason future economic benefits is very important, because there could be certain assets which you might procure, which may not have a future economic benefit. The question is whether that can be included as an asset or not. For example, you can buy pollution control equipment. It may not have a standalone economic benefit. The question is whether it is considered to be in property, plant and equipment. The answer is yes. While it individually it may not provide an economic benefits to you, but along with the associated assets, this asset is necessary for you to generate economic benefits from other assets. So therefore, that qualifies as an property, plant and equipment. But certain assets may not qualify for an property, plant and equipment. We can talk about that in the future as well, in the subsequent slides. So what are the costs which can go into property, plant and equipment? Is all your employee benefit costs at the time of construction or acquisition. In terms of, there are costs specifically included for that, spent for that, site preparation costs, initial delivery and handling costs, any installation and assembly costs, professional fees, and any commissioning and testing costs. So what cost cannot be capitalized? We used to have a standard earlier, in the sense, the guidance note which talked about cost incurred during the pre commencement period or so. So that has been completely taken away, and what is set out in the standard is relevant in terms of capitalizing those costs. Startup costs cannot be included. General overheads cannot be included. Pre-production costs cannot be included. Abnormal losses and wasted materials cannot be included. Sometimes you might incur liquidated damages, demerit charges, etc. So that will not constitute an cost which can be included. That cannot be included. Operating losses cannot be included. New facility, if you are spending for opening a launch facility or a new facility, if you are asking somebody to come and open the facility, those cannot be included. Similarly, if you are relocating a particular plant and machinery to another place, that cannot be included. For example, sometimes you move the one plant to another plant. You move those plant and machinery to another place. You incur uninstallation costs. You incur the transportation cost, etc. Those cannot be included because that will not provide additional economic benefits. Therefore, those costs cannot be included. Similarly, if there are costs which are incurred when the asset is idle, that cannot be included as well. So this is very important in terms of what cost can be included and what cost cannot be included, because the standard defines clearly in terms of what is part of the cost. Some practical aspects which we kind of get to understand from a day-to-day basis is that any day-to-day servicing cost of that particular asset is expense and it is not included. Cost of replacement is included, provided it meets the definition of a property, plant and equipment, which means you will be able to generate future economic benefits out of that asset. Then it can be included. Once you include that asset, you have to de-recognize the previous cost. For example, in airlines, typically a lot of times they change the seats. Those seats can be considered as a separate item, and you can consider as a replacement cost, which you can include in the fixed assets. You can amortize over the useful life of those assets. Sometimes major inspections or overall happens. For example, in the pharma industry, you include an FDA cost once in 3 years. If you have to get an FDA approval, you have to incur those costs. And in the shipping industry, you do an hull charges once in few years to make sure that it is in an appropriate condition. Airlines industry, you incur a cost, a major inspection which happens once periodically. So these costs can be capitalized and amortized over the expected period over which the economic benefits will flow to the entity. Once you are amortizing this, once you are capitalizing this, you have to de-recognize the previously included inspection cost. So earlier there was no specific guidance in terms of how do you deal with this entire one-time inspection or a periodic inspection. How do we account for this? So there is a clear-cut guidance which is there in this. The other is on terms of decommissioning cost, which we talked about it. If you have to restore a particular area to the original condition because of environmental issues or other matters, whatever the costs which you are incurring, you have to present value those costs and include in the fixed assets, and you amortize those assets over a period of time. Componentization, again, there were questions in terms of how do we go about this. Typically, you have fixed assets which will have major components. For example, in an airline industry, you might have an engine which might have a useful life compared to the shell. In an cogeneration plants or in your electricity plants, you might have certain generators or something which will have a different useful life than the entire plant per se. Similarly, in various other industries. So in those situations, you have to identify the significant components which has a useful life as a separate line item of the asset, and depreciate that over the useful life of that component. So component accounting is a mandatory one, and it is not a policy choice which is available. Therefore, each company needs to identify what is a significant component within a particular asset, then record for that at an appropriate useful life period. For example, even in a building, you might have a roof which might have a different useful life. You might have to replace that roof once in 10 years because you might have put a different type of a roof. Then if that is a significant component, then you kind of take out that roof as a separate component, amortize over the useful life of that particular roof. So you have to do this componentization on a mandatory basis. Once you account for the initial cost, then the question is how do you adopt the methodology for subsequent measurement? There are two models which are specified. One is the cost model, the other is the revaluation model. Cost model, all of us will know that you take it based upon the actual cost which is incurred and the accumulated depreciation and the impairment which is reduced. As far as the revaluation model is concerned, you fair value that property or plant and machinery, whatever the case may be, and you recognize that increase in the other comprehensive income. It is important. The increase does not get into the profit and loss account when you do a revaluation, but if there is a decrease, that goes into the profit and loss account. So therefore, it is important that in a revaluation model, the increase goes into the other comprehensive income and the decrease goes into the profit and loss account. If you do a subsequent increase in the if in day one, if you can for the first revaluation, if there is a decrease which has gone into the profit and loss account, we are doing a subsequent revaluation. If there is an increase to the extent of the already the decrease which has been charged to the profit and loss account, to the extent you can take that credit into the profit and loss account. Otherwise, generally it goes into the other comprehensive income. So, and this needs to be done on a periodical basis. The standard doesn't give any specific timelines, but they say that there's an indicative period of 3 to 5 years. You have to do the revaluation, because typically the market values tend to change. So the revaluation model is not going to be a simple affair in terms of that revaluation model will help in terms of the profitability of the company. So that is not the case. It goes into the other comprehensive income, and therefore it doesn't help from a profitability perspective. As far as the depreciation is concerned, you have different methods. You can do it based upon the straight line or the WTV method, or based upon the production units which you are expecting out of that particular property, plant and equipment, and it is done on a component by component basis. Typically land is not depreciated except for if there is a prepayment towards the SIPCOT authorities, etc., which we talked about in the right to use concept. While Schedule 2 provides for the indicative rates of depreciation, there is a flexibility that to the companies either to take the depreciation at a higher than the rates which are prescribed under Schedule 2, or lower than the rates which are prescribed under Schedule 2. Earlier in Companies Act 1956, there was a minimum depreciation which was provided. There was no option for the companies to charge depreciation which is lower than the rates prescribed in the Companies Act 1956. However, Schedule 2 provides a flexibility. The rates are only indicative. So long as you have a technical opinion about the useful life, which is appropriately disclosed in the financial statements, you can follow whatever the useful life which the company needs to do it, so long as it's backed up by a technical view. And the other question is, in terms of consolidated financial statement, there is a uniform accounting policy which needs to be there. The question is whether the companies need to follow the same useful life for the subsidiary and the holding, or for the methods, whether it needs to be the same. The answer is no, because these are all accounting estimates, both the method as well as the useful life for accounting estimates, and it is not an accounting policy. Therefore, you could have a different method of depreciation for the subsidiary and the holding company. So there is no specific there is no specific requirement that you need to have the same. The method needs to be the same for the subsidiary and the holding company. Some of the practical consideration which we have in terms of the property, plant and equipment is that spare parts, whether it can be capitalized or it should be inventorized. Typically, the spare part needs to be capitalized because it is necessary for the asset to be run on a consistent basis. So therefore, it needs to be included as part of the fixed assets. The question is when it should be depreciated as well, right? Whether it should be depreciating from the purchase date, or should I be depreciating from the date on which I issue the spare parts? The answer is you should start the depreciation when the asset is purchased. So you can't defer the depreciation aspects. Environmental assets, we talked about this. We talked about it. Environmental assets can be included as part of the assets, and it can be capitalized and it can be depreciated. What constitute cost, whether trial run costs, can it be included as part of the cost of property, plant and equipment? The answer is yes, it can be included. Along with any revenue generated, needs to be reduced as well. As far as the tax and accounting is concerned, there is a difference. As far as the accounting is concerned, the capitalization date will be the ready for intended use. IT generally it is put to use. Therefore, accounting capitalization may precede the tax capitalization. As I said, revaluation method is not so easy. Loss gets into the P&L, gain is into the other comprehensive income. We talked about spare parts in terms of when the depreciation starts. It's from purchase date. Change in useful, if you're changing your useful life and the method, you do it on a prospective basis. There is no requirement for you to do it on a retrospective basis because both are accounting estimates and not a change in the policy. Accounting, so assets which do not have an economic benefit. For example, if there is a school building which is constructed by a company which is handed over to the trust, the question is whether we can include that school school building in as an asset. The answer is no, because it doesn't provide any economic benefit unless the school is specifically provided for the employees of the company, and there are no outsiders who are allowed, and which is part of the staff welfare concept, and therefore it produces economic benefits, then you could consider. But typically these will be charged after the profit and loss account. These are some of the practical considerations from the property, plant and equipment accounting. Maybe I'll take some of the questions which the members have quoted. Okay. Raw material cost used for testing the plant before commercial, could that be capitalized? The answer is yes. I said that testing cost can be included, and any revenue out of that will be reduced from the cost of the project. Can you please explain concept of componentization? So as I said that for example, I talked about let's say in a sugar mill, right? You will have the sugar blades, and let's say you have the sugar, whatever that conveyor belts which are there, and you have various other assets which are there. The blades will have a different useful life. The conveyors will have a different useful life. So therefore, this needs to be considered as a separate components and has to be depreciated. It cannot be put as an property, plant and machinery, continuous process machinery relating to the sugar plant, and you cannot depreciate using a standard rate. So you have to componentize that and depreciate it. And similarly for a power generation plant, that the turbo generators may have a different useful life than the external shell. So you have to componentize that. So you have to componentize each one of those items and see what are the critical parts, what could be the useful life of those parts, and then depreciate according to that useful life. Then contributions received from NGOs for capital should be deducted from cost of contributions received from NGOs for capital assets should be deducted from cost of assets. As far as if somebody is giving a grant, that grant will be reduced as part of the cost of the asset. It cannot be recorded as an income. If third party is contributing towards the capital asset, and that is a grant, that will be reduced from the fixed assets. Can a company have higher depreciation rates over Schedule 2? The answer is yes. You can have either higher or lower as well, because it's only an indicative rate. But you need to have a technical opinion, either internal or external, and disclose that in the financial statement, saying that you are following a rate which is different than Schedule 2. But nothing harm in saying that aspect. That's a so long as the company will know in terms of what is their useful life. Any threshold limit is there for spares to be capitalized? The answer is there is no specific threshold limit which is set out. Maybe you can club items as spares, and then if it's a regular spares, like it doesn't have a period which is beyond 1 year usage, it's a normal spares like consumables, then you don't consider it as a fixed asset. You take it as a consumable inventory and charge it off to the profit and loss as and when you issue. But it's typical critical spares which are required, which has a period which is more than 1 year, then you capitalize. Can we offer cost model for different classes of PPE? All for different classes of PPE for all people? Yeah, you're right. If for same class of asset, you can follow only one method. For example, building, if you have taken, within building you cannot pick and choose. The entire building class needs to be follow a revaluation model. Similarly for land, if you have taken in the same company, for building you can have a revaluation model, for land you can have a cost model. So that is permissible, but within building you cannot make a cost and a revaluation model. So each class of asset is important, not the overall PPE needs to be a fair valuation principle. Please kindly explain fair value method of valuation once again. Okay. So, so on day one, let us say you put the cost on the balance sheet. Subsequently, what you will typically do is you fair value it on a periodic basis. It can be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. You first you amortize that particular asset on day one. Let's say you put it as a cost as 100 crores. You take a depreciation charge of 10%. 90 crores is the next year WD which comes. Now you feel that there's a significant change in that market value of that particular class. So 90 crores, now it becomes 150 crores. So the fair value of the property, plant and equipment is 150 crores, and you have your cost is the amortized cost is 90 crores. Now this balance 60 crores, you will take it to OCA. So debit fixed assets, credit OCA. Now the new cost becomes as 150 crores. You will amortize this 150 crores over the remaining useful life. So every periodical period you look into it and do a fair valuation of this. Whether life of the spares can be more than the life of the asset, we have this concept in case of blow molding machine, whether life of the spares can be more than the life of the asset. So the only typically you cannot have a situation where the spares can be more than the useful life of the asset, because if the life of the asset expires, I'm not sure how you will be able to use the spare unless the spare can be taken out. And when you purchase a new asset, that the same spare can be included in the new asset. In that case, you can componentize that separately and depreciate over the useful life of the asset. The stock in trade is transferred to PP and we start depreciating the same. Should we treat it as a change in accounting policy with retrospectively, or should we treat it as a change in accounting? So this is a normal concept. This is not an accounting policy choice. If stock in trade, so there might be a reason why we are okay. You are talking about all these years you have considered a particular item as a stock in trade. Now you want to transfer it to PP. I don't think so. You have to do a retrospective accounting for this. It's just a change in intention to usage of this particular product. You thought about that you would be selling this product. Now you are planning to use this for your business purposes. It's only a classification change, and therefore, and whatever the asset is, you will amortize over the remaining useful life. So I don't see a challenge in terms of it's an intention to usage. Inventory is held for sale, right? In the sense, in the normal course of the business, property, plant and equipment is held for production or for the future economic benefits. Testing cost can come under development cost under intangibles. Testing cost, see, it will be included as part of the property, plant and equipment under the head plant and machinery. I'm not sure about how it will get into intangibles unless you're developing an intangibles. Like any specific patents or know-how, if you're developing, then it can come under there, but not the typically it will be included under the plant and machinery costs. Okay. Can you advise what is OCA? Okay, so under the Ind AS, you have a concept called we call it as statement of total comprehensive income. In the statement of profit and loss account, there are two line items, two sections which are there. One is the profit and loss section. There is a comprehensive income section. So all the regular assets and liabilities are the normal income, sales, cost of sales, expenses, finance cost, PBT, tax, profit after tax comes. Then there is a concept called other comprehensive income, where you where items like actuarial valuation, changing the actuarial valuation, fair value changes of investments in equity shares, those are included under the heading called other comprehensive income. So any revaluation surplus is also included under the heading other comprehensive income. It's a concept under the Ind AS. Can we capitalize the upgradations that we do to a system even if it does not increase the life of the asset? It only improves the system performance. It only improves the system performance. Can we capitalize the upgradations that we do not do a system even if? So you should have a future economic benefit to that particular asset. So long as you have the future economic benefit, it only improves the system performance. You have to see whether it improves the future economic benefits. It should meet the definition of an recognition. For more than one period, you should get a future economic benefit. Then you can capitalize. I'm not sure whether the system performance will do that. If not, it cannot be capitalized. Idle assets cannot be accounted as assets. Is there any specific period you treat it as idle asset? See, idle assets. See, on the old standard, we used to call it as an asset retired from active use. So idle assets here still you will be included as the assets, and you will depreciate that, because there are only two classifications the assets. One is property, plant and equipment, and asset held for sales. Here you are not planning to sell. If you are planning to sell this asset, then you move it to an asset held for sale. But if it is not, that it is included under property, plant and equipment with a footnote disclosure, but you have to continue to provide the depreciation. Treatment of loss or gain and revaluation to be accounted on individual asset basis or on overall net figure or on asset class basis. It is based upon the class of assets which we discussed for that particular thing. If depreciation rate varies between the economic useful life of the asset and standard rate, which is take. If depreciation rate varies between the economic useful life of the asset and the standard rate, which is taken as per government, do we have to consider the useful? Yeah, yes, it is a useful life of the asset. So that is what you will consider for the depreciation. It can be different from Schedule 2 rates. If fair value is computed at year end, say Q3 of a financial year, so do we charge depreciation up to date of fair value computation? Then the net is compared with the FD rate. Fair value is computed at year end, say year end stroke, say Q3 of a financial year. So do we have a charge depreciation up to date of fair value computation, and then the net is compared with the FD derived? No, you are right. At the date of the fair valuation, you would amortize it, then you do an OCA. If you have a quarterly financial, preparing quarterly financial statements, you take it at that particular period. Decommissioning cost. So let me explain. For example, let us say somebody is putting a copper smelting plant or something, and you know from day one saying that this will result in degradation of that particular place, and therefore at the time of vacating that particular place after a period of time, you have to put that place in order. And after 10 years, you know that you are going to spend so much of amount for putting that place in order to correct that place, because you would have spoiled that place. Therefore, you have to incur certain costs. So that cost, you do a present value of those costs and include in the fixed assets, the property, plant and equipment, and you amortize that cost. Let's say 100 crores you have to spend after a period of 10 years to correct that place, in the sense you are putting to the normal shape. You present value that, let's say that becomes 40 crores now. You add 40 crores to the fixed assets, amortize that 40 crores over the useful life of the asset. In this case is 10 years. This the present value of the cost, which we said is 40 crores. That 40 crores you will bring up to 100 crores over a period of time by charging interest. So how it will happen is, you will debit interest cost and credit the decommissioning liability. Over a period of 10 years, it becomes 100 crores. You incur 100 crores as a cost at the end of the 10th year. What in this process, what you are doing is, on day one, you are including the decommissioning cost in your fixed assets. Hope you are able to hope I am able to explain to you. Yeah, so that is what how to ensure changes in fair value when the other units in the same industry are not adopting fair value for such asset. How can, so that's what you have to see whether it is relevant or not for doing a fair value. See, while fair value may be interesting in terms of from a banker's perspective, it will also decrease your return on capital employed, right? So your return on assets as well. So it will increase the asset base of the industry if your book becomes an asset heavy in the books. So it may not be a comparable one. So you have to take an industry call in terms of whether it's correct to do it or not. So done for existing and useful life rework for this when componentization has to be done when you are adopting this particular standard. So even for the existing assets, you need to do it. It is not prospectively. Even for the existing assets, you need to do it. If you have not done in the past, you componentize it and amortize or depreciate the asset over the remaining useful life of the asset. Land purchased on loan with intention of office construction, interest paid on loan out to interest, intention of office construction. So so the land is a qualifying asset. It is a purchase on loan with intention to office construction, interest paid on loan. So there is a clarification on this, where the loan which is taken to construct the particular property, the interest on that will be considered and it will be included as part of the building cost. So there is a clarification which is there. You can, I'm not sure if it's an ESU opinion or some clarification in the past. So it can be included as part of the cost of the construction. It meets the definition of a qualifying asset. Oh. Have I answered all the questions? Maybe. Yes, the item is taken for the land, but still it can be capitalized. 1 minute, sorry. For capital expenditure incurred on or will the useful life. For capital expenditure incurred on ROU asset, will the useful life be restricted the remaining period of the ROU asset? For example, the modification of building is incurred in the 3rd year, the lease period restricted to 7 years. Yes, the answer is yes, because you cannot exceed the lease period unless you have an intention to extend, because you will not, how will you be in a position to recover that cost? So it will. Is it mandatory to revalue the asset as per Ind AS 16? No, it's a policy choice. In the sense, you have a choice either to do it under the cost model or under the revaluation model. If an addition to the existing asset has to be constructed or modified to comply the statute of like TNAB or pollution component, which is significant value, but if the test of it can be entered differently, how can we consider? That's what I said, that I clarified this. You can capitalize this because this is necessary for you to run the other asset. So therefore you can capitalize. Okay. I explained the impact of the forex gain on loss in asset construction loan. So this is set out under the borrowing cost standard. Where let us say if you have taken a foreign currency loan, and this foreign currency loan, there is an exchange difference. If the exchange difference can be considered as part of the interest cost. Let's say you have taken a foreign currency loan at 2%, right? And you have an exchange loss of certain amount. If you have taken the loan in the Indian currency, it would have been, let's say, 8%. So the differential is 6%. Now, out of the total loan, out of the exchange fluctuation, to the extent of the 6%, it can be considered as a borrowing cost. So the borrowing cost is nothing but the interest cost plus the exchange differences to the extent of differential between the potential Indian borrowing and the actual foreign currency loan. That 6% can be included as part of the borrowing cost and can be included as part of the capital. It can be included and capitalized so long as it meets the definition of a qualifying asset. Hopefully you are able to. Fair value accounting, is it mandatory for fixed asset? The answer is no. You do a cost basis or a fair value. It is a choice which is available for you. So that's all from property, plant and equipment. I'm happy to answer additional questions if you can open up the line as well.
So they can unmute and speak.
Yeah. there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Any specific questions on both the standards, Ind AS 116 as well as Ind AS 16? I think all of them are muted, or they can unmute themselves because.
They can unmute themselves. I have given option to unmute themselves.
Oh, you're given an option to unmute.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's been open since the start of the session itself. So
Okay.
they can unmute and ask them.
Okay.
So the presentations are over, right? So is there any?
Yeah, presentation is done with. I'm done with, and I think I've been able to answer whatever the questions that members had. If they have further questions, I'm happy to answer that as well.
Maybe they can put it in chat box or they can unmute and speak.
Yes.
Also,
We'll give another 2-3 minutes for the members to kind of. Maybe members can share their industry experience, difficulty in adopting Ind AS 116, because that was one of the difficult standards to adopt for people in general, especially those who had number of leases, especially on retail business or companies having a lot of properties on leases. It was a big challenge in terms of doing this exercise. So somebody's having somebody wants to share as well, they can share with that. Or if there are any questions, they can do as well. As far as property, plant and equipment, I think there's no big change except for the fair valuation model, which is there, and then you have the Schedule 2 concept per se, which allows you to do a depreciation more or less than the Schedule 2. Then you have the concept of componentization, this overall or inspection cost, spare parts cost accounting, etc. So otherwise, largely PPE standard remains to be the same compared to the previous standards.
See the questions in chat box.
There are questions?
Yeah, in chat box you can see.
No, chat box, whatever the questions. Oh, okay, sorry, it has come in, is it? Okay, I was saying.
Stop the screen sharing, then you can just able to see the chat box.
It becomes easier if I read it. Okay, so I can explain. Okay. See, disclosures requirements under both the standards. For lease, you have to disclose the type of the lease, and you have to give a reconciliation between the lease obligations from the opening to the closing, whatever the new leases which has come into picture, and the amortization period for the lease. So that's largely the disclosure. In terms of that, lease modifications, what I said was, if there is a change in the lease term or in the lease payment subsequent periods, you see whether there's a separate asset which comes into picture, and also you do a present value of that new lease obligations, compare with the old lease obligation. The differential you go and adjust in the right of use assets in terms of the lease modifications. Rental concessions due to COVID Ind AS 116, I discussed this. There are two types of concession which can be there. A, the concession can be on reduction in rent. B, it can be the deferral of the rent payments. As far as the reduction in rent is concerned, you can credit to the profit and loss account, debiting the lease liability. As regards if there is a deferred payment, then what you do is you do a new discounting using the old discount rate, because there's a deferred payment, right? There's a present value of the future cash flows will change. So therefore, you do a new discounted present value using the old discount rate. Compare the new discounted value vis-a-vis the old what is there in the books. The difference, take it to the profit and loss account. So as far as the explain the impact of forex gain on the asset construction, we discussed on the loss portion of it. If there is a gain, that gain can be reduced from the cost of the fixed assets. Cost in the sense, so long as it is a borrowing cost. However, beyond, so this is the discussion which we said is about only on the gain or loss during the construction period. If there is any exchange gain or loss beyond the construction period, then that cannot be included into the cost of the fixed asset. That goes into the profit and loss account. So, so long as it is only relating to the construction period, it will be covered. Beyond the construction period, the change in the exchange rate goes to the profit and loss account. If an asset moves from into an investment property from PP, so your investment property, you will show it as a separate class of asset, separate line item in the financial statement with the subschedule. You will amortize over the useful life of that asset, and you will disclose accordingly. So the depreciation on that such assets will be the same like what you do for the property, plant, and equipment. So please share the link of material and recordings of earlier sessions. That is for you. Can we get the PPT after the session is over? Yes, you will get it. The materiality is different for each company. Can the company takes not to calculate, say 5 lakhs equipment, since it is a 1,000 crore company. So I don't know whether 5 lakhs, if you accumulate a lot of equipments, how much it becomes material, you will have to take a call. But I would typically say 5 lakhs. 5 lakhs is a large amount, because you might, if you aggregate, if it's on an aggregate basis, 5 lakhs is not a big number, but each asset, if it's a 5 lakhs, you are considering even for a I think you are asking from a lease perspective, right? 5 lakh each individual lease, if you add up, it could become a multiple item, then it could be material amount. So 5 lakhs, and for an individual item, it may be material. So COVID concession, we talked about. Parent company outside India follows revaluation method, and subsidiary in India follows cost method. Should subsidiary align with parent? Please advise. So your parent is following a revaluation method. So for each class of asset, it should be the same methodology which is specified, right? So when you are doing a consolidation, you have to take one methodology for that particular class of assets. So in my considered view, I don't think so you can follow two different methods, but I can take this question, Arun, and respond to you. I will recheck this and confirm to you. In my understanding, you cannot do it because it is for class of assets. As far as the consolidation is concerned, you can't distinguish, but I'll reconfirm this position to you. How can we do depreciation method? WDV be considering life of asset. Can you explain with example? So see, when you for example, on day one, you estimate this estimate the useful life of the asset is 10 years, right? You depreciate the original cost, let's say is 100 crores, you depreciate 10%, right? So that goes into then it becomes 90. Then 90, the remaining useful life is 9, right? Sorry. So you first derive a rate based upon the useful life. That rate is applied on the original cost, which you will get the depreciation, and you will reduce from each of the years. So you will derive a rate at the initial period. What would be the rate that you apply on the original cost? Determine the each of the years depreciation.
will the borrowing rate change every year? For example, you take vehicles, the borrowing rate change. For example, you take vehicles under lease, which every year, so for say 3 years, do we need to change the lease rate every year for the new batch of? Yeah, so you need to change it for each of the. Every year the interest rates could change, right? Your financial condition may change. The market borrowing rates will change. So if you are taking a new type of if you are taking a lease in every year for a different set of period, you will apply a new different discount rate. You cannot take the old discount rate as the same basis and continuously apply for subsequent periods. So that's what I was talking about. Lease agreement is entered for less than 12 months and renewed each year. If there is an option to extend, then you need to determine what is the lease term. So typically, if your intention is to extend and you have an option to extend, then you include as part of the lease term. And if it is beyond 12 months, after including the extension period, then if it is crosses 12 months, then you cannot consider it to be a short-term lease. If the organization is having lease for a long period, then how much time period to be considered for present value of lease accounting? You will consider for the entire period. If it is for 15 years, 15 years, you do it. 20 years, 20 years, you do it. Whether depreciation can claim on investment property, explain investment property accounting. So what is investment property? Investment property, you are holding this asset for rental or for undetermined use. So these are the classification. So if it is going to be held for use in the production of goods or services, then it's a property, plant and equipment. If it is for undetermined use or for rental for others, it becomes an property. Sorry, it becomes an investment property. Once it becomes an investment property, let's say a building you are classifying, you are planning to give it as a rental, and you are not in the rental business, right? So you will depreciate that the useful life of the building over the useful life. So that is how the investment property accounting happens. So that's the way the income tax, sorry, not the accounting happens. You classify a separate line item called investment property in the balance sheet. Okay, I think I answered all the questions which I could see. Sorry if I have missed something. I'm sorry for that, because of so many messages which are there. If it is for income tax question on whether depreciation can claim on investment property, from income tax perspective, I don't think so you can claim, because under income tax, I think they provide a specified standard deduction, right? So I don't know. The specified standard deduction you get for depreciating that asset, you include rental income and you claim that standard deduction. So you don't claim that as a depreciation. In the books, you will have a depreciation, but not under the income tax as a separate claim. You will not be in a position to make. If your question is on income tax. Is there any basis on which we can decide whether a building has to be classified as PP or investment property? As I said, if it is held for use in the production of goods or services, then it is a property, plant and equipment. If it is for rental or for undetermined use or for capital appreciation, then it goes as an investment property. So the usage purpose is relevant for to classify as a PPE or investment property. If your normal business, running your business, you are using for that, it is a PPE. If it is not for that, I'm going to give it for rental, or I'm going to give it for capital appreciation, or I do not know what I will do with that asset, then you take it to your investment property. I hope all the questions are addressed. Yeah, I think I have kind of done with the question. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much for the time on Saturday morning. Hope this session is useful for you. Please, okay, sorry, one question a member has put it. For builders, sometimes still property inventory so rented out, how to treat sometimes property inventory sold, rented out, how to treat such income? Sometimes still property inventory sold,
rented out. See, this is inventory, right? So these are inventory. This is not fixed assets, right? This property is sold, is rented out, and so this would be, if you are giving, I think it should be a reduction in your inventory cost, right? Because what is cost of inventory is cost incurred till the production, any incidental recovery out of that. In my considered view, you should reduce from the cost of inventory. If you're putting that as an income, it doesn't make sense because you're bloating your inventory on one side and you're taking another income. So you should typically reduce that from your cost of your inventory. Building given on rent as transit house to MD. Building given on rent, whether yes, it is a yes, it is. Yes, you are building given on rent to MD. Yes, you are right. That will be a property plan because it's for administrative aspects, right? So that will be classified as an. Is there any difference between Ind AS and Ind AS for investment property accounting? I don't think so. The answer would be the same. There's no specific difference in terms of that. Can we treat the residential properties taken for accommodating the employees of the company? Can we treat the residential property taken on lease, I presume, for accommodating the employees of the company as ROE asset? The answer is, if you're taking the residential properties on lease, it is, of course, whether you are taking for branch office or for residential properties for your employees, it's still a lease arrangement only. So it will be part of the ROE asset. You're right. Difference between Ind AS and IFRS for lease and PPE standards. See, for lease between Ind AS and IFRS, I don't see a big change. There is no significant difference. Even for PPE, I don't see a big difference here. One and the same, largely. There might be small difference which might be there, but I don't remember it's a big difference which is relevant. One clarification: entity is taking certain storage capacity in customs area, and the business model is such that it will continue to use the space as long as the company operating in such case. What would be the tenure considered for the lease, assuming agreement is made every year? See, okay, there are 2 points to it. One, the storage area, if it's clearly demarcated for you, and the supplier, the whoever is providing the customs area, whoever is providing you the same, do not have the right to substitute that place with other place. You have the control over that space, and it's specifically identified for you. Then first of all, then it is an identified asset. So you have to meet the test of an identified asset first before getting into the lease term, right? So in this space, I presume that you have an identified space. They are providing you, you have a control over that identified space, and they don't change the space for you. And it is an identified space. If you have an intention to extend that over a period, though it is a 11 months or a 12 months thing, then you can include the extension, the extended period. That will be the extended period include the original term plus the extended period will be considered for the lease period. As between Ind AS 16 and amended Ind AS 10, there is no big difference. Largely one and the same. The standard has got amended recently. We have the control. Okay, then as you said, it's an identified asset, and therefore, so long as you if the extension, you can take up the extension, then you can include as part of the asset. The business itself is building, warehouse, and renting. Building, then properties, it's a PPE, right? If you are in the if it is in if you are in that particular business, then it is an then it is a property, plant, and equipment. Any difference between Ind AS 116 and relevant US GAAP standard? largely Ind AS 1 because it was a converged standard from a US perspective. US also has adopted the same standard, and largely it remains the same as far as the Ind AS 116 is concerned. Conceptually, there's no big difference between Ind AS 116 and US GAAP standard.
Sir, so can we conclude the session, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all for all the relevant questions. I have to get back to Mr. Arun Kumar on one question, so I will look at it and get back.
And we thank you on behalf of our chairman and secretary in their absence, sir, for addressing our members on topic in day 16 and 116. And thanks for excellent presentation, sir, and addressing all the queries. And looking forward to for the next session, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir.
Have a good weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.